באכlכם מלחם. So this is talking about the mitzvah of challah. The mitzvah of challah, which is an unspecified amount, but must be amount that is of that's chshivus, has significance. So, and this is given to the Kohen, part of the 24 gifts, as it were, that the Israel gave to the Kohen, upon which the Kohenim subsisted. So, it will be when you eat from the bread of the land. You should give it an elevated offering unto God. And what's that? From the beginning of your dough, titnu Hashem truma. We should give to Hashem truma, an elevated portion. When you say mamti, the words of Rashi explaining Rabbi Yosef, yeah, elevated. We do adigbis, and it's known the question as we analyze the pasuk here. Mao imrei. Why does the pasuk say? Pasuk says, and it will be when you eat of the bread of the land, you should give it an elevated offering to Hashem. Mao imri melechem ha'aretz. What does he say from the land of the land, from the bread of the land, referring to Yisrael? The pasuk previously said that all this will take place b'vayachem b'aretz, when you come to the land. So all the pasuk needs to say now is when you eat of its bread. I don't have to repeat again the bread of the land. Right? Simple side. It was already stated that you're coming into the land, and that's where this mitzvah will begin to apply. Another question. It says when you eat of the bread, then you should give a portion to the Kohen. The inference is that when it's truma, when you eat, first you eat, then you give the portion of truma. But that's not the way the mitzvah is observed. The halach is that we first give and remove the piece of dough before we eat it, before we even bake it. So what's the pasuk saying? And since nonetheless the pasuk says, "Ba'achlechem tarimu," when you eat, then you give truma. Move on, it's understood that we need to fulfill gam hashmoyis hakos of the inference, even though b'peil we give begashmius, you give the dough before you eat, but there's some other kind of giving beruchnius that eating precedes it. Shachila kidemes the trum. And how that would be? We're going to explain what is this giving of trum even after one has partaken of the bread. Not even bedafke. Yeah. Shachlis are clear. Why does he say bread of the land when it was already stated you're coming? This mitzvah is observed when you come into the land, and why does the pasuk imply that you give truma after you eat? Beis lahavin zeh ulahavin zeh yesh lahatchim tchil ma shenizboya b'ma'amarim ha'kodemin. We should first preface that which was explained in the previous ma'amarim, and footnote 6 tells us that the publishers tell us that leis atali to this point, we didn't get to our hands. No one has submitted a transcript. The publishers in brackets. What they mean is because over the years, people that had written during Chazorah or even on their own, like Zalman's father, Label Kaplan Lavashov was recently. So in his Bachrisha years in 1770, he used to write up many of the Fabrengens, and quite a few of the Maimonim of those years are thanks to him. So they're hoping that someone out there's got a transcript, but at this point we still don't have it. So there's at least 2 Maimonim that we don't have. So there they've explained Be'inyan Lechem. So he's saying, to understand this, the preface which we spoke about in the previous Maamar, and we spoke about Inyan of Lechem in the Aretz v'Lechem in Hashemayim, this heavenly bread and this earthly bread, manna. What's the Inyan Baruchnis? Tehine Lechem in the Aretz or Inyan Yichud Tato. Bread from the earth is expressive of the lower unity, in contrast to heavenly bread that's expressive of the higher unity, right? So we're all familiar that Yichud Tata, the lower unity and the high unity, all speak about God being the only reality. However, the lower unity, the starting point is the self and the surrender of self, but consciousness is the starting point. I am, that's a given. I have to prove that. But then I struggle with recognizing, and I do recognize and surrender, bittul, my existence, and acknowledge that it comes from Hashem, and ongoingly so. God's constantly creating. And therefore I truly do not have any independence. But this is an intellectual truth that is appreciated and nurtured and developed by the self. The starting point and the end point remains the self. That's called the bittul. In general, it's called bittul hayesh. The yesh remains, the something remains, that's me, but I'm devoted and I can acknowledge the truth. As opposed to yichud ilah, the higher unity, the starting point is God. God, then creation. And that kind of awareness, which is the experience of Atzilus, is bittul b'mitzias, complete and utter nullification, nothing other than Him, not just in words and language, but experientially so. As he goes on to say, first describing now lechem min ha'aretz, yichud tato, the lower yichud. Right, we just started learning this in Tanya now, that Shema Yisrael, the whole Yishar Yichud, is to explain the statement in the Zohar. That Shema Yisrael is Yichud Ilah and Baruch Shem is Yichud Tata. That's the whole Shara Yichud, which we are into now. So what's the Inyan of Yichud Tata? Shazel calls Inyan Avodas HaBirurim. Yichud Tata is all about elevating the world. So the world is here, and the world, its natural state, doesn't know or feel God. So that's the avodah. The avodah of the lower unity is to elevate and refine the world. Avodah Birurim, extract the sparks, as it were, and elevate the world. B'chol lamates hamalachos, and the 39 malachos, the sidura de pas. What he means is, what he's referring to is, as everybody knows that on Shabbos, what are the malachos that we're forbidden to do? All of the malachos that went into making the Mishkan. We learned this from the juxtaposition of the laws of the prohibition to work on Shabbos with the description of the building of the Mishkan. That's what the Torah means by not to work, which means, what is work? Work is making a Mishkan, making the world a home for God. On Shabbos we don't work because Shabbos is a taste of the perfect world, so there's no elevation or fixing the world on Shabbos. So what labors are forbidden? All the labors that went into making the Mishkan. So the sages determined there were 39. Now, when the Mishnah, Masechta Shabbos, lists the 39 malachos, beginning with plowing, the very first act in producing produce. So the Mishnah then talks about, in stage number whatever, oifer, baking. The Gemara notes, there was no baking in the Mishkan. I mean, they did bake the bread, but that's not part of the construction of the Mishkan. They cooked. They did cook. They had to cook the dyes by which to dye the wool, the tapestries, etc., and clothing of the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara asks, you went through from planting, first the plowing and planting, and then the whole process of the winnowing and threshing and everything else, and then it goes. Then the Mishnah mentions baking, we're not cooking. So it's the same malacha. It's exactly the same malacha. But the Gemara answers, Sidura de Pasanokat. The Tana chose to lay out the order of the malachas in terms of baking bread and not cooking. Why? First, the reason is because bread is the staff of life and the common element in our meals. And so when he's spelling out the halachas for everybody to observe, he spells it out in the most common use. Of course, we cook, but first is bread, first is lechem. The Rebbe is saying that the whole bread is symbolic of the whole avodah of elevating the world, which is why it is the primary food for a meal, which is why we call money bread. Right? Well, they used to. Because the whole point is to subsist. And what's the symbolic staff of life? Is lechem. All to say that lechem min ha'aretz means, what does it mean to produce bread? It means in all of the stages that produce bread, symbolic of all our physical engagements. It's all about elevating the world, the end result being the Mishkan. We're clear? So again, lechem in the Aretz, which is the closing of the Sibrurim, of all the Lamatas Malachas, of Sidura de Pas, the order of making bread, which is Achayresh first plowing, Vizereya, then sowing, etc. Right, we're clear. We'll continue tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem. Now today's